I've always believed if you stand for nothing, you will fall for anything.
When you need to realize that they're taking away your religious freedom, your pastor is a coward, and they're going to shut the church down in America if we don't stand up and stand out.
What it means to be human is under attack.
John MacArthur, thank God, finally, instead of rolling over, got a gut full of it, had a church packed to capacity, and now the authorities say because he's defied Governor Newsom's orders that they perhaps are going to cut the power.
Our ability to choose not to be muzzled as we walk the streets in public.
The churches should be open. There are no excuses. I'm telling you, I will go to jail before I will close our church.
And I think the last barrier, the last defense we have from any attack, which is our immune system, is now under threat by way of mandatory vaccines.
When orders come, however, that contradict the orders of our King, we have to obey God rather than men. 8,300 persons have died with COVID, not necessarily from it, but with it. And for California, the California statistic is that's 21 people out of every 100,000. That means the death rate is 0.02. 99.98% of people will not die from this. Half of those people who died are over 80. So if you're under 80, you have a 99.99% chance that you're going to live.
Sydney churchgoers may have been exposed to coronavirus.
We've got some 40,000 cases of COVID-19 in Minnesota thus far. According to the Department of Health people, that might translate into 10 times that many. And if it does translate into 10 times that many, that's 350,000 cases. But in 2018, we had more than 500,000 Minnesotans with the flu. They said wearing masks is not effective. Taking antibiotics is not effective. A month later, Governor Walz comes out, talks about 74,000 Minnesotans dying. Later on, he went back to 29,000, and right around then, I put a different video out saying, just the facts. And I said, I'm not buying 74,000 Minnesotans dying, I'm not buying 29,000. And then this one came out a month later, right around May 1st. This is a model that they're using. And it says on here, Minnesota's model projects nearly 1,000 deaths a day in mid-July. Well, folks, that's next week.
Are these numbers
reliable?
Accurate? Are they reliable? And should we be gauging or determining public policy? The channel down there in Orlando, Fox 35, called the Florida Department of Health when they looked at the numbers that were coming out this past week and saw that the statewide positivity rate, which is the number of positive tests for SARS-CoV-2. People who go into a facility, get the test, and these numbers are then reported to the Florida Department of Health.
It's the positives out of the total number of tests.
Right, and they were showing a positivity rate of 11% statewide, but Fox 35 noticed that some of these testing facilities were showing 100% positivity rates.
100%.
Meaning everybody who came through and was tested had the disease, had the virus. And so they began calling some of the local facilities in Orlando and found that those numbers weren't exactly accurate. For example, the Orlando Veterans Medical Center showed a positivity rate of 76%, but when they called, a spokesperson for the VA said, no, that's not correct.
We have to consider the many thousands of generations that have been before us who were able to withstand all manner of risks and who ultimately fought for the right to have a right. This right is under threat by way of nothing more than a psychological operation using fear as the key weapon.
The actual rate for the center is 6%, not 76%.
76 versus 6. Oh, they're so similar.
Fear of an invisible enemy that is going to kill us.
That just does not equate to the response this society has had. This is not a problem to be feared. This is a triumphant hour for the church to be the church.
What has amazed me in this period is the lengths that supposedly very intelligent, very capable individuals will go to explain exactly what's happening around them, as though it were just an unfortunate set of circumstances. And they're quite happy to accept solutions that bear absolutely no resemblance or are so far removed from the problem that we're trying to solve. You see, the fact of the matter is, what we see as a solution was in place long before we even had a problem. In fact, it goes back to problem, reaction, solution. You have a solution. In this case, total technocratic control of the entire human race. In order to achieve that, you need to create a series of problems. Problem number one, climate change, producing extreme weather conditions that must be attributed to man's misuse of the planet. Problem number two, a global epidemic on a pandemic scale. Both of those two problems give you the plausible deniability in the first instance to roll out some pretty extreme measures, some pretty extreme solutions. Given time, when the problem has been long forgotten about, the changes, extreme institutional changes, will remain in place.
I stand before you not as an expert. As an actor, I pretend for a living. I play fictitious characters, often solving fictitious problems.
We are engaged in an information war.
As we come to terms with ever-increasing changes to our way of life, the question is there anything to suggest that this was planned?
There is good and evil in every people, every individual human.
And if so, by whom and for how long has this plan been in the making? Were we groomed at all for this period?
An amazing vaccine.
And if so, what is the motive? In my research to complete this documentary series, evidence has come to light to suggest that the pandemic was indeed part of a scripted response to put in place a number of technocratic control measures that would not have been possible to achieve without the chaos, the hysteria, and the fear of a supposed pandemic.
We know it acts like a virus. It causes high fever and respiratory distress. Tracking and treating a mysterious outbreak like this would take the CDC months.
Anyone who hasn't been exposed already needs to wear a mask.
China? Isn't that where flu viruses come from? Yeah. Whatever it is that originated in China.
I'm authorizing a quarantine on everyone who's come in contact with a symptomatic person.
Chloroquine, that's an anti-malarial drug.
No. Listen, it suppresses the enzymes.
In other words, New World Order out of chaos. Upon further investigation of the solution and measures that have been instituted globally to halt the advance of this supposed pandemic, it would seem that these proposals align exactly to the proposed societal changes in the Rio Earth Summit, in the UN Agenda 21 for Sustainable Development, and also the newly revised Agenda 2030. These proposals were well documented and were delivered in part as though they were local community initiatives by NGOs, change agents, and special interest groups on a local level. Even your local area will have policies that originate back to these agendas. However, the more radical measures would have taken too long to implement incrementally and by stealth, it seemed that something profoundly game-changing was needed. And indeed, the prospect of a major event as a catalyst to change was suggested in several of these globalist manifestos. The belief was that major change could only come as a result of a global catastrophe which would unite the entire world to a common cause, a common response. These responses would dramatically change human life and would result in a world with tighter, top-down government control. And so the question remains, is there anything that we've seen today with the protocols for social distancing, shelter in place, the wearing of face masks, and indeed the proposed mandatory vaccines? Is there anything in that list that mirrors the ambitious proposals outlined in those discussions and in those agendas? In the forthcoming videos in this series, I'll certainly do my best to present the information and let you decide.
It's so overwhelmingly out in the open, you can't believe that nobody else is looking.
For everyone here tonight not familiar with Agenda 21, I would suggest that this is the beginning of your learning curve, not the end.
This is Agenda 21. This is the United Nations plan. It's a 300-page, 40-chapter plan. And ICLEI was created in 1990, prior to this plan's adoption, to implement United Nations Agenda 21 Sustainable Development worldwide. Sustainable development is a term that was defined by the United Nations, and all of these terms come out of the United Nations. Smart growth is part of the United Nations Agenda 21. Your general plan elements are designed in accordance with United Nations Agenda 21 principles. The plan restricts your choices, it limits your ability to govern yourself, and it takes away your freedom. This seems like a rhetorical statement, but it really is not. This is actually what this plan does.
Agenda 21 was agreed at the 1992 Earth Summit in Brazil, which was headed by this guy, Maurice Strong, one of the gang big time, a mate of Al Gore. And he said, Maurice Strong, this billionaire oil man, etc., he said, isn't the only hope for the planet that the industrialized civilizations collapse? Isn't it our responsibility to bring this about? What they are trying to do and planning to do is use saving the environment to justify deindustrialization and the end of democracy. Anyway, this is the wish list in documents for Agenda 21 operating through the United Nations. An end to national sovereignty, all justified by saving the world, by the way. An end to national sovereignty. State planning and management of all land resources, ecosystems, deserts, forests, mountains, oceans and fresh water, agriculture, rural development, biotechnology, and ensuring equity equals slavery. The state is to define the role of business and financial resources. Abolition of private property is not sustainable, they say. Here we go again. How many times has this come up? Restructuring the family unit. Children to be raised by the state. People told, this is what Aldous Huxley said in Brave New World, people told what their job will be, major restrictions on movement, creation of human settlement zones, I'll get to them in a minute, mass resettlement as people are forced to vacate land where they live for reasons I'm coming to, dumbing down education, achieved a long time ago, mass global depopulation in pursuit of all of the above. And what they're doing to hide it is they're setting Agenda 21 organizations up in all local communities all over the world, America, Britain, all over the place, and they're giving the impression that each of these is basically an independent local community initiative when it's all being orchestrated through this organization, through the United Nations, called Local Governments for Sustainability.
The
The document I'm about to share with you comes from the Rockefeller Foundation, and credit to Dave C. for sending me this. Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development. I'm going to skip down. By the way, this report was produced by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Global Business Network in May of 2010. I'm going to skip down to page 18 and just read a few paragraphs and tell me if what we're seeing today isn't pretty much what they wanted all along. Page 18 starts, Lockstep, a world of tighter top-down government control and more authoritarian leadership with limited innovation and growing citizen pushback. Remember, this was written in 2010. They write, in 2012, the pandemic that the world has been anticipating for years finally hit. Unlike 2009's H1N1, this new influenza strain originating from wild geese was extremely virulent and deadly. Even the most pandemic-prepared nations were quickly overwhelmed when the virus streaked around the world, infecting nearly 20% of the global population and killing 8 million in just 7 months. The majority of them healthy young adults. The pandemic also had a deadly effect on economies. International mobility of both people and goods screeched to a halt, debilitating industries like tourism and breaking global supply chains. Even locally, normally bustling shops and office buildings sat empty for months, devoid of both employees and customers. The pandemic blanketed the planet, though disproportionate numbers died in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central America, where the virus spread like wildfire in the absence of official containment protocols. But even in developed countries, containment was a challenge. The United States' initial policy of strongly discouraging citizens from flying proved deadly in its leniency, accelerating the spread of the virus not just within the U.S., but across borders. However, a few countries did fare better, China in particular. Now remember, guys, this is just fiction. It's a projection written in 2010. They say the Chinese government's quick imposition and enforcement of mandatory quarantine for all citizens, as well as its instant near hermetic sealing off of all borders, saved millions of lives, stopping the spread of the virus from earlier than in other countries and enabling a swifter post-pandemic recovery. China's government was not the only one that took extreme measures to protect its citizens from risk and exposure. During the pandemic, national leaders around the world flexed their authority and imposed airtight rules and restrictions, from the mandatory wearing of face masks to body temperature checks at the entries to communal spaces like train stations and supermarkets. Even after the pandemic faded, this more authoritarian control and oversight of citizens and their activities stuck and even intensified. In order to protect themselves from the spread of increasingly global problems, from pandemics to transnational terrorism to environmental crises and rising poverty, leaders around the world took a firmer grip on power.
For some people, they will have no ability to discern that what they're experiencing is indeed a pandemic. They have no understanding that over the last 10 years or more, whether it be through social media, news media, their thoughts are no longer their own. Their understanding of the reality around them literally has been constructed. We're looking at psychological damage such that they cannot piece together logic of their own accord other than that which they're bombarded with via news media. And so for them, there is no way of smashing the illusion of their reality.
How did you do that?
Lee Say, legendary gambler. He bets on everything, anything, huge cash bets all the time. Once the Bellagio put Bill Gates out of the high roller suite because Lee was flying in. He is the perfect Vic.
But how did you know who he was gonna pick?
We told him to. We've been telling him all day. From the moment he left his hotel room, we've been priming him, programming his subconscious. He's been seeing the number 55 all day long. On the elevator, in the lobby, even the stick pin on the doormat. Not only that, we loaded his route from the hotel to the stadium. He looks out the window, primers are everywhere. Now he doesn't see it, but he does. There's no getting around it. He even sees Farhad. Suggestions are everywhere, from the number of flowers in a vase to the tramp stamp on the hooker we sent to his room last night.
That is genius.
Yeah, and it's not only what he sees, it's what he hears. The Mandarin word for 5 is woo. There are 124 woo-woos in sympathy for the devil. Now, he's not registering it, but it's all there. So when he picks up those binoculars, looks out on the field, sees a familiar face with the number 55 on his jersey, some little voice in the back of his mind says, that's it. And he thinks it's intuition, and he picks.
Do you want me to write it down?
And you, being in the dark, was the convincer. We call that the little blind mouse.
I'm the blind mouse? You're such an asshole. You can't tell me that's 100% real.
Well, it's probabilistic. Farhad has it at about 59%, but third in Vegas.
And what if he picked wrong?
Double it till it happens.
That's amazing. You're amazing. Nikki!